Have you ever had that feeling of being made a fool of in your own home? Well, that's exactly where this story begins. The day I went out to work and came back to find that the woman with the short hair, brown skirt, and arrogance at full volume, also known as the president of our lovely HOA, had authorized 3 residents to sheep in my yard. No warning, no meeting, without so much as a, "Hi, what's up? Can I tear up your lot today?" When I stepped through the gate and saw those shovels entering the land as if it were a public park, I froze. One of the guys, sweaty, with his foot on the hoe, still had the nerve to smile and say, "We're going to install the well here, see? Everything has already been approved by the HOA." Approved? On my land? The HOA, for those who don't know, is that neighborhood organization that thinks it's in charge of everything, even the brand of toilet paper you use. And this woman, the president of the association, had decided that my backyard would be the ideal place for a community irrigation well. They just forgot to ask me if I agreed. Small detail, right? I didn't even answer. I just turned around and went straight to her house. Doorbell. Nothing. I punched the door 3 times. She opened it smiling, as if she was delivering cupcakes, and let out the most absurd sentence I've ever heard in my life. "Ah, you've seen what's new, haven't you? This is going to make our court so much better." I wanted to laugh, but my hatred was so high that my sweat evaporated. I asked in all honesty, "Are you telling me you've given general permission to dig in my yard?" She raised her eyebrow, with that little smile of someone who thinks she knows everything, and said, "The land is underused, and since you never attend meetings, the association voted unanimously." The unanimous vote was her husband, and their poodle, who apparently also has the right to vote. I went back to the yard. The guys were already at the second hole. One of them had even brought a giant blue drum. I just said, "Stop it. Everyone off my land now." Believe it or not, one of them had the gall to complain that they had already dug too much to give up now, as if I was going to offer them juice and apologize for disrupting their schedule. I called the police. Of course, because at that point, I was already teetering between an outburst and wanting to throw concrete on them right then and there. But the police's response was that standard beauty. "This is a civil dispute, sir. You need to file a lawsuit." In other words, if I didn't solve it, nobody would solve it for me. And then, my angel, I did. The next day, I called a friend of mine who works in construction. He said just 3 words, "Bring the cement." He thought I was renovating, but when he arrived and saw my yard full of holes, scattered shovels, dumped drums, and chaos, he understood everything just by looking at me. It took 3 truckloads of cement. I cemented everything. The yard, the fence where they'd hung the well schedule, and even a piece of the sidewalk in front of her, which encroached 2 feet onto my land. She came running, shouting that I was being unreasonable, that this was destruction of public property. Detail, my land. But this time, it was me who smiled and said, "Hey, didn't you say that this would increase the value of the court? Now, it's premium concrete." And I left her there, with her heels sinking into the fresh cement and her face whiter than the walls of the HOA club. The story, of course, was just beginning, because the next day she came up with a revenge plan that not even a cheesy drama movie could come up with. The next day, the neighborhood seemed to have woken up in another universe. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and the whole neighborhood was slack-jawed at what had happened. 3 cement trucks in my yard didn't go unnoticed, and that wasn't even the intention. The woman, of course, was already in full attack mode. She didn't even wait for the concrete to dry properly before she started going around the neighborhood, saying that I was an emotionally unbalanced person who threatened the collective good. She even called an emergency meeting at the HOA headquarters. Call printed on letterhead, people, paper, letterhead, as if she were mayor of the city. She said the topic was hostile behavior and sabotage of sustainable initiatives. Hello? The whole neighborhood showed up more out of gossip than concern. They made a point of bringing popcorn disguised as salad bowls and even wine in thermoses. When she started talking, she sounded like a late-night talk show host. Exaggerated, dramatic, rehearsed. She told us that the well was an old plan of the association, which had been on the agenda for months, which was a lie, because no one had ever talked about it. He said that the project had been democratically approved, and that my action was an environmental attack against everyone. The icing on the cake was when she cried. Literally, she cried. She said that she had put her own money into preparing the well, and that, because of me, she was now at risk of losing a municipal incentive for green projects, an incentive that, apparently, only existed in her head. An older neighbor, Mr. Don, even tried to interrupt to ask where these minutes and documents were that no one has ever seen, but she cut him off with a, "This is not a time to share, it's a time to reflect." What? She wanted to monopolize even the suffering of others. The day after the meeting, my mailbox was clogged with anonymous notes. Some called me selfish, others supported my attitude, and there was even one that said, "concrete" on them. It really had become a soap opera, and I was the unwitting protagonist. She, on the other hand, decided to double down. She filed a formal complaint against me with the town hall. The reason? Misuse of building materials. The accusation was that the cement modified the visual ecosystem of the neighborhood. People. The woman took visual ecosystem to a notary's office, and as all hell has several phases, the worst was yet to come. I received an inspection notice from the town hall. The inspector was coming to assess the unauthorized structural modification of my yard. She thought she was going to take me down with paperwork, but what she didn't know was that I already had a history of legal shenanigans and a very well-organized folder with a deed, original plans, and everything that proved that the land was mine, without any clause of submission to the HOA. On the day of the inspection, the woman appeared out of nowhere, wearing a flowery dress and a fake smile on her face. She tried to strike up a conversation with the inspector, offer him coffee, and show him the damage caused to the neighborhood's environment. The inspector, drier than stale bread, only replied, "Ma'am, I'm here to assess the owner's land, not to take part in a tour of disgrace." She froze, and the inspector began his work. He measured, took photos, checked the documents, glanced around at the still fresh concrete, and at the end, he turned to me and said, "Everything's fine here. Your land, your responsibility. HOA has no power over this area." I thanked him, and he left. She stood there, motionless, her eyes almost trembling with repressed hatred. For a moment, I thought she was going to start speaking in tongues, but no. She turned and walked away without saying a word, just tapping her heels on the sidewalk, as if marching off to war. From that day on, my life became a target. Not a week went by without another attempt at retaliation. Once, they threw horse manure at the gate. Another time, they cut off my internet. I found out that someone had opened the wiring box in the street. And of course, all these coincidences only happened after she passed my house with that smile that made you want to wash your face with caustic soda. But what nobody expected, not even her, was the next step I was preparing. Because if she wanted war, she would have it. Only my way. And my way, my friend, involves a tractor, metal plates, and a surprise that was going to turn the neighborhood upside down. On Saturday morning, while the neighborhood was still asleep and the smell of cut grass had not yet invaded the air, a dump truck pulled up in front of my house. On top was a load of huge metal plates, the kind used on heavy construction sites. The driver, a man of few words and many muscles, just looked at me and asked, "Is it to bury or to cover?" I replied with a smile at the corner of my mouth, "To seal." And so began the second phase of my revenge, turning the yard into a decorative bunker, a monument to lost patience and other people's stupidity. I spent weeks designing everything. I hired an engineer friend of mine, the kind of guy who is happy to say, "This will take some work, but it can be done. The idea was simple but ingenious. Seal every hole, every trace of that pathetic attempt at a community well with steel plates to guarantee the safety of the neighborhood. I justified it as accident prevention. After all, according to my official version, someone from the HOA had dug illegally and abandoned the work, leaving the land at risk. It wasn't a lie. In less than 48 hours, the yard was covered. From a distance, it looked like a modern art installation, the kind that no one understands, but everyone pretends to find profound. Up close, it was a big "fuck you," stamped in metal and concrete. The woman, of course, appeared. She always does. She almost had a stroke right there on the sidewalk when she saw the result. I was with her mother, a lady who looks like she baptizes wine at home with tap water, and they both kept pointing as if they had discovered a war crime. She looked at me, her eyes wide, her chin trembling, and said, "That's visually aggressive. You're traumatizing my daughter." I looked around, without seeing any daughter, and replied, "Visually aggressive is digging holes in other people's land. This is conceptual art, peace and security." She let out a grunt that sounded more like a choke and marched off, pulling her mother by the arm. Over the next few days, she tried everything. She called City Hall again, called the entire HOA, even tried to convince the neighbors that I was preparing the ground for a weapons bunker or something illegal. The most comical thing was when a car from the environmental watchdog showed up to do a heavy metal check. She had actually filed a complaint saying that the steel could be poisoning the soil in the neighborhood. The inspector looked at the whole thing, laughed discreetly, and asked if the neighbor in question took her medication properly. He said that the steel was industrial, approved for civil use, and that there was nothing wrong with it. He left a written report and walked away, clearly feeling sorry for me. But things got more and more tense. What had been a tantrum turned into outright hatred. She started riding her electric bike past my house in a loop, like a patrol. Sometimes she'd stop, take a photo, pretend to write something down. One night, they threw flyers all over the street with my face, and the words, "Hostile neighbor, destroys neighborhood harmony, pure kindergarten level." Too bad she printed them on glossy paper, the most expensive at the printer, and the rain destroyed everything in 5 minutes. The irony is that afterwards, she went out to collect the wet papers herself, looking like she was burying her pride. But she hadn't yet understood that the hole, literally, was much deeper. While she was collecting public defeats, I was preparing the most refined part of my response, a formal denunciation of the HOA itself, not the woman, the institution. I gathered evidence that the documents authorizing the well were invalid. No minutes, no official approval, nothing filed. It was all done on the basis of, "It's better to ask for forgiveness than permission." With the help of another resident who was also fed up, we gathered the necessary signatures to call for an internal audit of the association. Yes, because even neighborhood associations have holes in the law, and where there are holes, someone like me finds a way to dig deeper. We discovered some interesting things: money embezzled from neighborhood parties, invoices for services that never existed, and even an environmental consultant, who was actually her cousin, who keeps posting videos on TikTok teaching how to plant mint in disposable cups. On the day of the audit meeting, the woman showed up dressed as if she was going to be canonized. White blazer, flag brooch, posture of someone about to receive the Nobel Prize for neighborliness. But when the accountant, hired by us, started to open up the figures and show the irregularities, she started to shrink. Her manicured nails started tapping on the table, her eyes running away from the papers. When the word deviation appeared, she raised her hand and asked for the meeting to end. She said she needed to pray and reflect. But the crowd was no longer in the mood for meditation. They wanted blood, or at least a refund. The woman left the room with her blazer unbuttoned, her brooch hanging to the side, and the air of someone who finally realized that maybe, just maybe, she had dug too deep. The following week, she stopped riding her bike past my house. Instead, she started going out of the garage with the car window down, speeding more than she was allowed to. She rode past looking like she didn't know if she hated me more or if she was starting to accept that she had lost. But that's not the end of the story, because there's one last card she's still going to try to play. And this one, my friends, this one will make the cement in my yard shake. She disappeared for a few days. She disappeared in a strange way, too quiet by her noisy standards. There were no more electric bikes doing the rounds, no more leafleting, no more rousing speeches about the collapse of the sense of community. Even the gossip about her died down. Just when the whole neighborhood thought she'd given up and maybe moved away, she showed up. And she showed up in the most scoundrelly and desperate way imaginable. With a team of lawyers, I received a written notice. The charge, obstruction of community utility and creation of unregulated structure that compromises the aesthetic integrity of the subdivision. She actually had the nerve to hire a law firm to sue me for putting concrete on my land. She used arguments worthy of a Mexican soap opera. She said that the hostile concrete had a negative psychological impact on the residents, that the metal plates generated excessive heat and could be affecting the health of the children in the street, and the most absurd, that the land where the wells were being dug belonged to the HOA, not to me, because it was green, unbuilt land. I didn't know whether to laugh, applaud, or prepare a Molotov cocktail. She had created a complete legal fiction based on absolutely nothing, and she was betting that a judge would fall for it. Worse, she used her position as president of the HOA to legitimize the documents she herself had fabricated. A real theatrical play with a forged stamp and protocol. I called my lawyer, who is the kind of guy who doesn't say much, but dismantles arguments like a fish. I showed him the papers. He read them, scratched his chin, and said, "This is so ridiculous that if I laugh out loud in court, the judge will laugh along." But even so, he recommended caution, because cynical people like that, when they find themselves losing, play dirty to the end. So began the most disgusting phase of the story, the legal war. She showed up at the hearing looking like a martyr. She wore a beige dress, a scarf around her neck, and looked like a poor thing. She began by saying that she only wanted to protect the rights of the collective. Her voice trembled. She spoke of how the aggressive behavior of certain neighbors was creating a hostile environment for children and the elderly. And she ended with a deep sigh, as if she had just saved humanity. The judge listened in silence, and then he asked me to speak. I just handed over the documentation, the deed to the land, the plan approved by the town hall, records that the HOA had no jurisdiction over my area, and, to cap it all off, the videos of the excavations carried out on her orders, without authorization, with people entering my property without permission. Her lawyer tried to fight back, questioning the validity of the images. But that's when the judge looked over his glasses and said, "Sir, the private property sign at the bottom of the video is literally here. It's even dated. Are you going to say that the sign is also a fake?" The room fell silent, the kind of silence you like to hear. The woman swallowed. Her lawyers looked away, and the judge concluded that not only was her action unfounded, but that it represented an abuse of power as president of the HOA. He ordered a fine, obliged the association to review all the documents, and temporarily suspended her leadership role. She left the courtroom looking like a wet pastry. Her heels were crooked, her hair disheveled, and she looked like she'd seen her reputation go down the drain. She didn't speak to anyone. No final theatrics. He went straight to his car and disappeared. But like anyone who doesn't know how to lose, she needed one last show, a final act, and it came on a rainy morning with an unexpected delivery at my gate. A rubble truck, that's right, rubble, broken bricks, rotten wood, torn sandbags, a real parting gift. The driver said that the owner of the lot next door has requested emergency disposal of construction materials at a location authorized by the HOA. One last attempt to provoke me. I called the police. I showed them everything. The woman no longer had any power, but she still tried to cling to the title of symbol of the community. When the officers knocked on her door, she collapsed. Literally. She cried, screamed, said she was being persecuted, that I was an urban monster, a territorial oppressor. One of the policemen almost burst out laughing when he heard. After that, she disappeared for good. Gossip had it that she had moved in with her sister in a neighboring district. Others swore that she was removed from the HOA unanimously. Ironically, even her poodle voted in favor. The truth is that she disappeared off the map. And for the first time in months, the neighborhood once again smelled of fresh coffee, cut grass, and silence. Real silence. My yard? It's still cemented over. The metal signs are now artistically painted. Each one has a word written on it. Don't mess with those who are quiet. It's become a tourist attraction for local sarcasm. And the best thing? No one has ever tried to dig anything up there again. The lesson was clear, because at the end of the day, some people only understand the weight of the consequences when they step on a very thick layer of reinforced concrete. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.